Today we have Bill Jenney. Bill Jenney's with the Vermont Department of Historical Preservation. He's been with the site for, as I recall, over 30 years. The only full-time employee at the Coolidge Homestead here in Plymouth, Vermont. The homestead started in about 1947 with two buildings there. Those of you who've been there will know them. Wilder House, and that's how I got to know Bill, because Echo Lake Inn was the concessionaire for the restaurant at the Wilder House for a couple of years, several years. And then the other building was the barn, which is right across the way. Then in 1956, the Coolidges, which have their family farm right close by, they were impressed with what they saw. They decided they would donate the rest of the buildings, except the church. Church is the Coolidge Foundation. So now Bill oversees 25 buildings on 600 acres. So Bill, tell us a little about yourself, about the site, and how you're dealing with what we've obviously seen as a lack of all those buses that we used to get up there for lunch. Sometimes 6 buses a day for lunch. So it's quite a feat to get them all through the restaurant. So
it's very much a different site this year. This is my first Zoom meeting doing a presentation, so I'm going to try to envision this audience out in front of me here. I started here in 1988, and so this is my 33rd year. And when I first began, half of the seasonal staff actually knew Calvin. And so that was an amazing group of people to know, because they were what we call first-person interpreters in the truest sense, because they were telling their life story and not something that they had read in a book. Of course, most of them were well into their 80s at that point, so that generation is long gone. But I am cultivating a younger crowd now, and I'm very fortunate to have a number of folks from the Ludlow area working up here, and I couldn't do it without them. Without our seasonals and our volunteers, this place would not be possible. I had the good fortune also of knowing John and Florence Coolidge very well, the son and daughter-in-law of the president. And John died in the year 2000, the age of 93. And it's basically because of them that we have this place now, because he was following his mother's wish, First Lady Grace Coolidge, in preserving not just the Coolidge birthplace, but the entire village of Plymouth Notch. And so, as Kevin was saying, we acquired the first two buildings, the Wilder House and the Wilder Barn, in 1947, and made some improvements at the cemetery to allow better access to the gravesite area. So John was impressed by that and gave us the Coolidge Homestead and its contents in '56. And then he gradually bought some of the adjacent properties, and then we gradually bought them from him. So he was, in a way, a property liaison. And he also gave us most everything that was presented to his parents during the White House years. Coolidge was the last president not to have a presidential library. That was a system that was started by FDR, and it applied to Herbert Hoover, who was still alive, of course, but Coolidge had already died. So Coolidge's papers are all at the Library of Congress, as are his predecessors, but Calvin was allowed to keep most of the things he was given from world leaders, and they went to the family, and the family has in turn given them to us. So we have the presidential gifts of state in this collection. So it's not just a collection of the early Vermont things. So from very special items from all over the world, which we bring out depending on the subject of our exhibits. In normal times, we have 14 buildings on the tour. This year, we could only open 4 of them. Just because of space limitations. If any of you have been into the Coolidge birthplace, you know exactly what I mean. We'd be able to get 1 person in that main room, and that would be about it. So we're hoping for better times next year, and Kevin alluded to the motor coach traffic, which we normally get, and I had 172 reservations this year, an all-time high, and of course they all canceled. And so, you know, you hardly blame people. They wouldn't want to be traveling on a bus for a week with 40 strangers. Not this day and age, but we're hoping for better times, as I said, next year. We had to cancel most of our summer programs. We did have July 4th which of course is a big day around here. I'm sure you all know that Calvin was born on the 4th of July. And so there's usually a very big ceremony that day involving 600, 700, 800 people. Well, we didn't highly publicize it this year. And if folks happened to be on site that day, they could attend the ceremony, which was basically for the family down at the cemetery. The Adjutant General of the National Guard did come with his aide camp. And there was a playing of taps and not the usual parade or anything like that. So actually it was probably something Calvin himself would have approved of more than the hoopla that we do normally. We were going to have a holiday open house in December, but we have just decided that is not possible either because it's just impossible to get anyone into a confined space these days. So yes, it's a little different, but I have to give major kudos to my seasonal staff who are all in the at-risk category themselves, at least age-wise, and they're all going around with the gloves and the goggles and spraying disinfectant constantly. And we're trying to keep the tour sizes small. 10 to 12 is usually ideal, and anything more than that, then I jump in to help out and space the groups apart. So I'm the safety officer for the site. So that's kind of the nutshell of what we have here. The new exhibit this year, which we did decide to go ahead with, we did get some funding for that from the Alma Gibbs Donchin Foundation, which has been a great support of our organization for a number of years now. And it's on the Roaring 20s. Of course, 100 years since that decade. And I have to say that this exhibit is a lot of fun. We look at the lighter aspect of the 20s. And so we look at art and literature and music and fashion and so forth. And a bit on prohibition, of course. And we're drawing objects from our collection. We have a beautiful gown out that belonged to Grace Coolidge. And then we borrowed a couple of items from the Vermont Historical Society, including a 1923 Atwater Kent radio, which is great because that was the year before they went into the enclosed model, so you can see all the vacuum tubes and stuff. And then the other item we borrowed was a home still that was discovered up in Barry. And it's actually a converted canning tub. And I guess it was too small to get much notice from the revenue officers, but Barry was the little center of such activity. So we talk about prohibition and some of the speakeasies and all of that. Well worth a visit. And we've decided to keep that up an additional year because so few people are seeing it, relatively speaking. So I'm open to questions if you have any. And what else would you like to hear about?
Well, I'll start, then I'll flag, see who else we have for questions. So you have 4 houses that are open, or 4 buildings. Could you tell us which ones they are and and then the other buildings that you have, a little bit, I'm familiar with them, but maybe some of the people that are here today aren't, on what their history is on each of the buildings.
Well, this year we have the Museum and Education Center open, and so that's where folks would watch the orientation film, and it's where we have our special exhibits. So the one is, as I mentioned, on the Roaring 20s, and then the main exhibit is really quite wonderful. That was put in a few years back and has a lot of computer interactives. We issue gloves to everybody so that they can touch the computer screens and so forth, and you can ask Calvin Coolidge a question and he responds, that kind of thing. So it's really great for kids. The other 3 buildings are the 2 barns, main levels of the barns. They, again, are pretty open spaces, so safe to get into. And then the Coolidge Homestead, which is the most important building in the complex here as far as what happened there. That was his boyhood home and where he returned every summer of his life, and was there as Vice President Coolidge when word came that Warren Harding had died. And so he was sworn in that house by his father. It's the only time a father has sworn in his son as president. And Calvin's father, who we know as Colonel John, did it in his capacity as a notary public. So it's not necessarily the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court that administers the presidential oath. But a little known fact is that when they returned to Washington the next day, they had a separate ceremony with a federal judge, because there was some debate as to whether Calvin's father, a state official, could administer a federal oath. But interestingly enough, it was a different day and age. They didn't publicize it for another 3 years until after Calvin's father died, out of respect for him, because of course he became a bit famous in his own right. This place really took off in 1923-24. 1924 was when Coolidge had his summer White House here. And that's a term that we don't use too much anymore, but in those days, it was very common for the president and the Congress to take 3-month vacations during the summer because it was just so hot and humid down in Washington. And so Coolidge came up here that first summer. It was right after the death of his son, and so it only lasted 12 days. He was anxious to get back to work, but literally thousands of people were coming every day during that time. In fact, one day a reporter counted between 4,000 and 5,000 cars out in the adjacent field. And so if you think 2 or 3 people per car, you're talking crowds of 10 to 15,000 in one day. And so that was quite an impact on this little village that normally had 29 people. So these 9 residents realized they had a very good thing going. They realized that folks were seeking out not just the Presidential Association, but to see what early Vermont looked like, because this town had no electricity or plumbing and 1 phone in the town. So basically these folks were living as their ancestors had 120 years before. And so they knew they had a good thing. Why change anything? And so all the buildings are in their original locations, and many of them have their contents intact from the 1920s. It's a real time capsule of that era. And in fact, it's been called one of the best preserved presidential sites in the country. Very unusual to find original furnishings in presidential museums, really. You know, you go to Mount Vernon, for example, and many of the furnishings there, George never owned. They're of the period, but they weren't personally his. But when you come to Plymouth Notch, you can see everything original. One of the little fringe benefits of my job is every 4 years I get to go to museum conferences for the presidential libraries. And so one of the last ones we went to was down to Little Rock, to the Clinton Library, of course. There, one of the side trips during that time was to Hope, his boyhood home. And I was expecting something modest, which it was, nothing nearly as modest as this one here. But we were given the full tour, of course, by they must have had 10 full-time park rangers there, the difference between a federal site and a state site. And I asked one of the rangers, what in the house is original? And he said, it was a fully furnished house. And he said, 1 book upstairs. And that's not atypical. So that was why this was one of Lady Bird Johnson's favorite presidential sites. And she was here when this was designated a National Historic Landmark back when she was First Lady. But at that point, there were only 2 buildings on the tour. And when she returned in 1995, there were then 12. And so she had to check everything out. We've never had a president here, but we've had a vice president here, and that was just 2 years ago. And that, needless to say, was pretty exciting when he arrived. So yes, we have his boyhood home, his birthplace, the general store, once operated by the president's father. The second floor of the store was the community dance hall, and that served as Calvin's office during 1924. And then we have his mother's home, which was the Wilder house. And that's when I knew Kevin back in those days. And that was originally the interpretive center when it first opened to the public back in the 1950s. And there's the village church, which is owned by the Coolidge Foundation, and that is a separate group from us. That became available in 1960. But they were still having services there, so we couldn't acquire that building because of separation of church and state. And so the Coolidge Foundation now takes care of it, and it's the only building I don't have to worry about here, which is kind of nice. They do a great job. And they maintain their offices in the lower level of the new Museum and Education Center. There is a functioning cheese factory. It was originally started in 1890 by Calvin's father and 4 of the farmers in the village as a logical outlet for their milk supply. And it continued functioning until the 1930s when it went out of business because of the change in milk storage laws in Vermont. A lot of the hill farms had to close because of the new regulations. And so then John Coolidge, the son of the president, revived the business in 1960. He operated until 1998, at which time we bought it from him. And so we own the building and the equipment, but lease out the business. And so Plymouth Artisan Cheese is the name of that business, and they're doing a great job. And if you haven't had Plymouth cheese in a while, check it out, because they have the regular Plymouth cheese with different flavors, but they're also working on brie and a blue cheese, which are both excellent. So highly recommended. And now that building, you go up to the front door and knock, and they'll come out, take your order, and bring it out to you. So it's kind of like curbside service.
Very nice.
The Coolidge house is my office. That's where I am at the moment. And that was Calvin's stepmother's house originally, and later was the first cheesemaker's home. And actually, it was the cheesemaker's daughter's house for most of the 1900s. Miss Aldridge, who I knew, she died in 1991 at the age of 99, operated a very profitable tea room and gift shop in here in the 20s and 30s called Top of the Notch. It included the gift shop and the tea room in the main house, but also in 1927, she set up 3 tourist cabins in the back. And that's where the Secret Service stayed in those later summers. And then she leased them or rented them out for general tourists for many years after that. But back in the 20s, she was making upwards of $200 a day, which was an enormous amount of money in those times. And in fact, what she made in 3 days here in 1924 enabled her to buy a brand new car. So put that into our kind of money, right? So the storekeeper was also the postmaster. And in those days, the postmasters based their salary on the amount of stamps they sold. And so the one here in Plymouth Notch usually made about $50 a year. Well, in 1924, in those 12 days, she made $1,500. So it's no wonder that all the other states were in great competition to get him elsewhere, because they realized what a boon it was to the local economies. So the second Coolidge Summer White House was in Swampscott, Mass. The third summer White House was in the Adirondacks. The fourth was in South Dakota. And that's when he dedicated Mount Rushmore, one of the few federal projects he endorsed. And the fifth summer, he was on the Brule River in Wisconsin. They were all good fishing spots. That was his one requirement. And of course, they had to be approved by the Secret Service, but as long as there was good fishing nearby, he was happy.
Have your priorities. You gotta have your priorities. So anyone else have a question for Bill? Go ahead, Bridget. Need your speaker on? Your microphone's off. There you go.
Hi, Bill. Just
Hi.
to reiterate the original furnishings point, we went to Garfield's home one time in Ohio, and my children like to say it was the worst historical site we ever went to, and they had several on the list. But this one was not even open yet. It was still under construction, and the fact that we had to stop there when it wasn't open has become part of family lore.
Mm-hmm.
But they had nothing original.
Yeah, yeah. But actually, Mrs. Johnson used to say after her second visit here that if you want to see a well-preserved presidential site, you should either go to the Adams House in Quincy, Mass, or this one here. And she kind of was a little bit more fond of this one, I think, because it interprets the same time period as Lyndon's boyhood home. But of course, there's a big difference between Plymouth Notch, Vermont, and Stonewall, Texas.
Go ahead, Tom.
I'm one of Bill's neighbors. I drive through the homestead every day. Hi, Bill. And I have quite a history with the family, and then I have one question. When we moved here in 1995, that year, Lydia Coolidge Sales, John's daughter, John Coolidge's daughter, called and said John would like to have trick-or-treaters. So it was our first year here, and we were going up to Rutland to trick-or-treat. So we stopped by John Coolidge's house and trick-or-treated.
So that was fun.
In 1967, then Postmaster Richard Moore wanted to build a house in a meadow where he used to spoon with his wife, and John Coolidge sold him 2 3/4 acres up on Messer Hill Road. And I bought the house in 1995 out of his estate, but John had to sign a quitclaim because he had the right of first refusal. So I thanked him for that. And now I have had a good relationship with Lydia. She signed a paper that said I could take lumber, firewood and maple sap off of the hill. And now Chris Jeter, the grandson, has been putting trails in there, and I've got a good relationship with him. So they're doing a good job. In addition to the 600 acres, the family has a lot of their land in current use, so it's forever wild. So it's really nice. My question, Bill, is this. My other place in Ludlow, 2 doors down, is a little property that used to be housed the Coolidge Dance Hall. So it can't be a coincidence that that was around 1925 when that was, in Prohibition, people were drinking down there, and all the people were up here at the White House. Is there any relationship to the name Coolidge to Coolidge?
There might be, because there were Coolidges down in Ludlow. They would have been distant cousins at that point to Calvin. And so it could have been that they were capitalizing on the famous name, because of course, one of the campaign slogans in 1924 was "Keep Cool and Keep Coolidge." And so they were maybe playing on that. But of course, Calvin himself was a teetotaler. And so there was none of that going on, at least at the White House, unlike his immediate predecessors, who were known for some rather wild parties at the White House. Things definitely changed when the Coolidges came in. But yes, that is great. The Coolidge family has been so wonderful to us, and continue to be. I, of course, see Chris and his 2 cousins quite often. And every once in a while, I get a phone call saying, "Oh, we've discovered something in the closet. Would you be interested?" And of course, yes. One of the more recent ones was a kimono that had belonged to Grace. And Chris said, "Well, Tammy's never going to wear this. And so why don't you take it?" And after doing a little research, it turns out to be from the Imperial Workshop of the Emperor of Japan. And it's just gorgeous. Some of you may have seen it when we had it out on exhibit, when we had our Grace Coolidge fashion exhibit a few years back. But it's beautiful ivory silk, and all down the back is a peacock in solid gold thread, which is quite spectacular, needless to say. So yes, we are very fortunate to have that connection.
Kevin? And I see Sharon, go ahead.
Hi, Bill. Sharon Bixby from the museum here in Ludlow. I just have a John Coolidge story too. It's a little different than Tom's, but he and my dad were very friendly. And as he would come up from Massachusetts on a weekend, he would stop here at the office to chit chat and occasionally use the restroom. You know, as men get advanced age, they need the restrooms more often. Well, we were renovating here, so it must have been in the 1980s, maybe 84, 83, 84. We were adding this addition on. And John's father's picture that was autographed for my grandfather was over the toilet in the back room. And John went in to do his business and came out and looked at my dad, and he said, "Gee, I had a nice conversation with my dad." And so my father was a little mortified that that's where we had hung him during the renovation. So now he has a place of prominence in our main office. And people will come in and say, "Oh, is that your great grandfather?" I said, No. Let me tell you the story. So
that's
it's
great.
just nice to have.
John, I'm sure appreciated that. He had a very good sense of humor too. I can still remember his chuckle. But yeah, they were all so modest, and sometimes he would be sitting up on the porch of the general store and talking with people, and they wouldn't have a clue as to who he was. And every once in a while, we'd have somebody come down to the old visitor center, and they had just been to the cheese factory and seen him doing inventory, and it was his business, but they were saying, "Oh, how can you make that old man work so hard?" Well, doing his inventory. And once in a while, he and Chris, his grandson, would go down and trim around the gravesite. And again, people would say, "How can you make that man work so hard down there?" And of course, he was tending his father's grave. But as I said, I got to know him fairly well, and I did help out bringing him over to Dartmouth Hitchcock for some treatments and so forth in his later years. And so I would be driving, and then all of a sudden he'd start talking about his father and going on. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I wish I could really write this down, because these are real gems that I had never heard before. And I know one time he talked about the visit of the Prince of Wales, who came to the White House, and that was that summer when his younger brother had just died, John's. And he didn't really think too much of the Prince of Wales, because he thought he was full of himself. But it was kind of interesting.
Okay. I'm scrolling through, so I can't see everyone at once. So Glenn, I see you. Glenn, your microphone's off.
There we go.
There you go.
Okay. Yeah, very popular site there, I understand, for tourists, and we don't have the buses this summer. What is your thinking about, next summer? Are you actively, reserving or booking bus trips, or how does that look?
Well, it doesn't look terribly hopeful, I'm afraid. I heard from one of our major companies, and they've decided to cancel all North American tours next year too. And so this could be going on for a while, I'm afraid. But I haven't heard from the Vermont receptive operators yet. They were the last ones to cancel out this year, and so maybe they'll be the first ones to book for next year. But again, people are a little leery about traveling in groups. And, even when they come here, they like the option of doing a self-tour rather than a guided one. So again, if something, like a vaccine happens, then this will all turn around. But we shall see. Hope for the best. Yes,
Tom?
Tom's hand.
I just want to add one other thing. There is I'm sure you know about this, Bill. There's a natural phenomena on the Coolidge Homestead, which is absolutely amazing. There is a hand-dug spring on the other side of one of the stone walls from the field that's about 10 feet in diameter that never freezes. I snowshoot a lot around the homestead, and I've been up there after a week and a half of sub-zero temperature when it was 20 below, and it's still liquid. And if I'd never seen anything like that. And if you've never seen it, it's worth a hike during the winter.
Yeah, it's a lot of water up on that hill. And in the old days, they had those springs hooked up to a faucet in the homestead. So we always say that the homestead didn't have any plumbing, but not technically, because they did have that one faucet that went to the kitchen sink, but they would have to keep it running through the winter just so it wouldn't freeze up. But they also had wooden water pipes underground connecting those springs to the horse trough that used to be in the center of the village. And I don't know about that freezing up or not, but as long as the water runs through those wooden pipes, the pipes don't rot, interestingly enough. And we have 3 of them on display in our agricultural exhibit area. And they are from when they were discovered, when there was some work going on up in that field. I understand that there are some 18th century wooden water pipes still in use under New York City and Boston.
Wow. All right. Well, it's about quarter of. So any final questions for Bill before we finish up?
Well, we hope that you all come up to the site. We are open Tuesday through Sunday this year from 10 to 5. We're closed on Mondays, and that's through October 18th. And so the hillside still has a lot of nice color, so do come on up.
Well, thanks again, Bill. Really appreciate it. Round of applause.
My pleasure.
All right. We'll see you up at the site.
Okay, thanks a lot.
All right. Enjoy the rest of the day.
You too.
So next we're going to have Ulla from Town Hall. I see an icon. I don't see a video, and audio's off. Ulla, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay. Are you going to do
Come
video
on.
or just audio today?
I'll just do audio. That's fine.
Okay. Well, great. Well, thank you so much for stopping in on our meeting, and we're having you on board to help us discuss the voting and everything that we need to know to get ready with the forms that were all sent to us. So take it away, Ulla.
Okay, all the ballots for Ludlow were mailed out October 1st, and I think most people have received them already because we are already getting some back. But if you wish to vote in person, you can still do that. Our polls will be open 10 till 7. But what you need to do, if you want to vote in person, you need to bring the ballot that the Secretary of State's office mailed you with you. Otherwise, if you don't, you have to fill out an affidavit that you have not cast a previous ballot. There's 3 ways you can either, if you want to, you can vote in person in the office. You can drop your ballot off here. You can mail it back. Or we do have a drop box in front of Town Hall now that can be used for ballots also. And we put that into place last week. Kevin put in place, I think it was last Thursday. And people have already used that too. But any other questions that, if you haven't received a ballot, please call me, let me know, because I can mail another one. That's not a problem. Because I did have one call today. He said he never received it. And I looked at my listing and I said, oh, he didn't get one for some reason. So I did put one in the mail for him. Or if people have changed their address, because what they did was they took the list as of the way it was on September 2nd. So if you have moved or have a different address, the post office will not forward the ballot. The ballots will come back to me, and then I will have to try to find a good address. For some reason, I guess they decided they cannot forward them, so they'll mail them back to me. So I haven't started getting any back yet, but I'm sure that I will be. And a lot of the people have probably moved out. So Glenn, question?
Yeah, when do you begin tabulating those ballots?
I'm not going to do it till the day of the election. I know some bigger towns are doing it earlier, but Lisa and I decided that we can do it all in that one day because probably the majority of people will vote absentee anyway. So we won't have that many people coming in during the course of the day. So we'll have all day to feed them into the machine.
Okay.
And when we used to do when the school ballots were merged, we would do like 700 ballots in like half an hour.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
yeah, so that's what we're gonna do. But I know the bigger towns, it'll be a big issue for them. And let me tell you, this is really keeping us busy right now.
I bet.
Really busy. A lot of phone
Sharon?
calls.
Well, it's Sharon here. I just have one question, well, 2 questions. I didn't get my ballot yet. Ron got his, but that's not an issue. Someone had said originally that these wouldn't be able to be run through your ballot reader. Is that true? Or you have to do it manually?
No, they're gonna go through the reader.
Okay, good. So, and then my other question is, an older person asked me if they have to vote all Democrat or all Republican. You don't have to declare your party, right?
No,
Everybody's
because
listed on that
all the
one ballot.
candidates are on there. It doesn't matter
Right.
what party you are.
Okay.
They're all on the ballot. And on our ballot, we're 2-sided. We've got the JPs are on the back side.
Okay.
So when you get your ballot, be sure to vote both sides. Just,
And if
Bridget?
someone,
Vanna Art. So, hi, Ulla, Bridget
Hi.
here. Do you have to hand count if there's a write-in on anything?
yes, we have to look for write-ins on all of them.
And so you have to hand count all of that, or if there's a
Right.
write-in for the JP?
Well, what the tabulator will tell us, if there's a write-in for each of the office. And so that's what we look for, is those offices that have write-ins.
Okay.
Because we have to account for them all. So there'll be a process to go through well, because you probably do it in Mount Holly.
Exactly, that's why I was asking.
Yeah. Yes, we do. This is one of the things that we have to do. But you don't have to count like fictitious names. If somebody puts down Santa Claus or, Casper the Friendly Ghost or whatever, you don't count those.
But does the machine count all those that don't have a write-in? Or do you have to count that, the entire, like the president and everything else, vice president?
If there's write-ins there, you have to account for those.
But let's say there's no write-in on the president, but there's a write-in on bailiff or high bailiff or something.
You have to count that. You have to look for that write-in.
But you don't have to go back and count the president ones, right?
No, because if there's no write-ins, no.
Okay, thank you.
Glenn, you had something?
Yeah. So the President of the United States indicates that this whole system is ripe with fraud. Ulla, how are you going to ensure that, it's not what President Trump says?
Well, the thing, you just have to keep counting, and you have to make sure you check off the names on the voter checklist. And if they come up with a second ballot, it's like, well, you've already voted, so you can't vote twice. So if the name is checked off on the checklist, then it's like, no, you can't do that. The only issue I have is the registrations through the DMV. And I've told them this several times at meetings that we have so many second homeowners. They get their Vermont driver's license. They'll fill out the application, but they don't check the box on the bottom that says, please do not add me to the voter checklist. And I get a notification from DMV to put them on. And I have to put them on. I have to put them on, like, I think within 7 days. But I do write them a letter and say, do you really wish to be on our voter checklist? I just had one happen the other day. And the guy said, yes, I do. Even though he had an address down in Connecticut. He said, we are planning on moving to Vermont and I want to be on your voter checklist. So I try to do that at least. But a lot of them, they don't put down that they vote someplace else. So we don't know where to notify. So that to me is an issue. And I wish that DMV would come up with a little better solution.
Right.
I think it's at the very bottom of the form, and most people just sign their name and then they figure they're done. But we've had a lot of additions to the voter checklist, by the way, too. Since they took the checklist on September 2nd, I've had over 40 people apply. So we're probably 100 more people right now than we had for the town meeting.
Wow.
Yeah.
Kim, you have a question?
Kim Lampert, how are you?
Hi, Kim.
And when is the deadline for, or the cutoff date for, this is the list that you're going with, the checklist?
There really isn't a cutoff date because you can register the same day. Vermont has the same day voter registration. So you could vote, you could register on November 3rd and vote for November 3rd.
And how do you know that they're not at their previous state, I guess? You know what I mean? Like, how do you know that they haven't already voted?
You don't. If they vote in another state, you don't know. We don't know. So that's an issue right there. Or even, well, I guess I could check the voter check. What I do is when somebody does register the day of, I come downstairs on my computer and I can access the statewide checklist and to see where they've voted and ask if they have voted there already.
But these big cities like Burlington or even probably Rutland,
Oh, yeah.
they're not going to have time to do that, are they?
Probably not.
They will check it, you think, or?
I think they probably will. They'll probably have somebody dedicated just to do that. Because, like in Burlington, they'll get a lot of like students.
Okay. Anyone else for Ulla question? Looks like not. Thank you very much, Ulla. I appreciate you coming in.
You are very welcome. Don't forget to
So-
vote.
And we'll see you at Town Hall.
Okay, all righty.
Thank you.
Thank you.